want to talk today about the public market in Ibogaine. And I would love to start with Shane, because you had this interesting quote saying, being public or going public or publicly owned allows everyone to be part of the solution and enables us to obtain required funding for clinical trials in Canada. So maybe you could just elaborate a little bit on this, because obviously Universal Ibogaine is going public very soon.
Yeah, and you know, with all this emotional outfilling going on between Theo Fleury and Dan the Man pharmacist, and you know, it's hard to talk about capital markets because it's something I've been doing for 35 years with a little company called Canaccord now, and we started in 1979, and you know, one of the most amazing groups of people I've ever seen. We've financed a lot of companies. You know, when I moved to Vancouver in 1986, I was starting in the business. I had a great mentor named Ted Turton. Peter Brown was the driving force, and what seemed to be the unifying force for that company's amazing growth from 10 million to over $1 billion was the fact that we all participated in the equity and we were all rowing in the same direction. So in co-founding Universal Ibogaine, which is a story in itself that I'd like to cover before we get into the dry capital markets stuff. But, you know, I'll say this, you know, I was raised by an addict from the time that I was a kid. And, you know, she was an addict most of her life. She was my stepsister. And I used to incur small injuries because I looked like my dad who'd raped her. So in pursuing that, you know, I'd always had an interest in this industry. And, you know, I have a partner and a wife who went into Betty Ford some 35, 40 years ago. And she's part of the lucky 5% that are still sober today. But she's battled various forms of other, you know, excess behavior that, you know, part of this whole program is mental health. And I don't have to tell you, J.R. Ryan kind of summarized that he had a calculation that this market was about $16 trillion and, you know, pretty well backed statistically. And frankly, I think he might be light, but he's a smart guy, and that works. So this being the biggest market I've ever seen, you know, I tried retiring 7 or 8 years ago and wasn't very good at it. So we financed a bunch of marijuana stocks that, you know, I really wasn't interested in the recreational side of marijuana, but CBD and some of the progressive byproducts were amazing. And I still think they're in their embryo stage, just still being developed. And I don't see this as a few good companies. I see this as a whole industry that's emerging and is going to take up, you know, a lot of the jobs that have been lost. And in this reboot that's going on between the airline industry, cruise ships, you know, and I would encourage, you know, kids that are hopefully being more enlightened in their development to, you know, pursue the fact that when society is sick and the bottom 30% of society is sick, we're all sick. And C19 could very well be a product of something like that. So in taking a global picture, you know, we'll get into capital markets side at any time, but my first experience with Ibogaine is a dear friend of mine, Kevin England, and Kevin won't mind me mentioning his name because Kevin probably spent several $1 million at various, you know, treatment centers, and like many was, you know, in back and forth. But Kevin was an amazing guy who'd fall into a puddle of mud and come out smelling like a rose. So he put 25 million into Dallas real estate, went on a big run for about 5 years, and came out of it and sold it for 125 million, donated Baldy Hughes, which was a treatment center up in Prince George, and was getting the key for the city. So he phoned me about 3 days before and said, you know, Shane, I'm in trouble. I said, well, what do you mean you've been in trouble? You've been sober for 7 years. Well, he was in trouble. Anyway, he made it through the awards and then disappeared to Cuba for a few months. And his son contacted me and said, you know, you got to get a hold of Kevin. And so I said, Kevin, if you're not back by Friday, I'm coming to get you. Well, he was back, and I said, you know, what should we try now? He said, well, I'm going to go to this Ibogaine clinic in Cancun for a week. I said, you've been to Promises, you've been to every place known to man, and you're going to go to do Ibogaine in Cancun for a week. And he said, yes. I said, okay, great. Call me when you get back. Well, when he got back, there was something profoundly different about Kevin. And Kevin's one of those guys that, you know, would have trouble sitting still for 10 minutes, let alone reading a book for 2 hours. But there was this profound change in him that was really intriguing to me. So, you know, I had to go in and see this for myself. And, you know, there was a friend of the family who had, you know, lost her way and was doing 2 grams a day of fentanyl. So first she had to survive a hospital visit, which was probably 50-50 living or dying. Then I took her down to Cancun, and I had to find a way to get in this clinic myself. So of course I had to be an addict. Whether I was or whether I wasn't was irrelevant. I had to see this myself in order to, you know, take a serious look at this, because I'd seen enough to be intrigued. So I went down, and it's now 3 years later. In fact, March 17th, this will be 3 years since I went down to Cancun and met Dr. Sola and Patrick Krupa and the whole gang that, you know, were behind Clear Sky's clinic down there. And of course, Dr. Mash was intimately involved and a big part of it. And, you know, I remember vividly sitting on the deck of the clinic and talking to Dr. Sola. And I said, you know, what you have here doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the world. And he said, I know. He said, I've been waiting for you. And
okay.
It was pretty much clear as a bell from that point. And then I went and spent a little time with Patrick Krupa and got the rest of the story. And I said, well, I don't know how, you know, to move this needle other than, you know, common sense should apply. Here's something that works. And how it works, and this is one of my favorite benchmarks. This is, for those of you that don't know, that's Ray Charles. And I'm sure most of you have seen his movie. And what he went through in heroin detox was the pain that we're talking about, what Ibogaine does. And getting through detox relatively painlessly in 18 hours and participating in the psychedelic experience of having a view of your life from 10,000 feet, kind of like if you're a golfer, you've played 9 holes and you're having a hot dog at the turn, and you're analyzing what you did well on the front 9 and what you did badly on the back 9 and how you're going to improve that on the back 9. I think I said the front 9 to begin with, is sort of the psychedelic experience that I went through. And I've never been a really big psychedelic, you know, player. I think like most of society, we were all looking for ways to keep up with the Joneses. You know, cocaine, Adderall is probably the next, Oxycontin in the works. And, you know, I think if you added Adderall, you'd probably find that you know, corporate addiction surpasses, you know, low-level addiction, lost it all. And it's truly amazing. So, you know, Ibogaine is not, you know, it's not a silver bullet. It's not but if you can participate, as Theo Fleury says, in trauma treatments, not being in post-acute withdrawal syndrome, not craving like a fiend, trying to figure out how to steal your mother's jewelry for the next fix, and all the other behaviors that go along with serious addiction. And there's mild addiction and there's serious addiction. And, you know, when you can't go 6 hours without putting a needle or an Oxycontin in your mouth, that's where Ibogaine works the best. Okay. For me, it's just common sense that this should be available.
Absolutely. Lindsay, can you hear us? Lindsay?
Absolutely.
Oh, there you are. Okay, sorry, because you're your picture was gone. I wanted to, I mean, since you're coming from the investment side, what is your perception of the current, let's say, Ibogaine investment landscape? How would you describe it? And what do you think is interesting for you as an investor with this?
Well, and what's exciting about the Ibogaine market, I think anytime you have the potential to dramatically curtail and impact addiction around the world, which is, as Shane noted, an enormous economic problem. It's also just it's not only an economic and a health problem, it's really a psychic problem. It drags all of us down. I think that is clearly not only a large opportunity socially, but and socioeconomically in terms of the overall cost of addiction, but clearly it's a huge market opportunity. We know right now that the global market for mental health medications is $85 billion currently. And that is for medications that for the most part really don't work very well. That includes SSRIs, but it also includes the variety of anti-addiction drugs, whether they're meant to help stop the craving or whether they're meant to help with keeping you off, whatever it is you're attracted to. What I think is really interesting about Ibogaine and some of the other, high potential substances that are being tailored to address addiction is that in many cases, it looks like they work on not just opioids, not just alcohol, also tobacco. I think that's nothing short of stunning when we really think about the potential there. From an investment standpoint, it's just one of many substances that fall loosely under the umbrella of psychedelics that are potentially so, and seem to be in human trials and human experiments going back decades, so much more effective than what we have been using to address all of these mental challenges, that I think that it's an economic no-brainer. The question really becomes who's going to profit from it the most, and you've got a whole bunch of people that are at the table, including those who are going to be building clinical networks and or rolling up existing clinical networks like the ketamine networks, or is it going to be those who create a formulation of the natural form of Ibogaine that perhaps is very user-friendly and can be accessed more quickly than a novel molecule entity that will have to go through testing, but may address some of the side effect issues or other, issues which may make it easier to administer Ibogaine in a setting that may take less time, less oversight, et cetera. So there's a lot of potential, clearly, and we're watching very closely.
But do you guys feel there's kind of a substance race at the moment between the substances? Because I mean, for example, Atai is researching, I think, 12 psychedelics or 12 substances. And it feels like, so every day, let's say on LinkedIn, there's another article saying, wow, now we found this variation of, let's say, even a combination of substances. And this is going to go really fast to bring this to the clinic. So it feels like 6 or 7 months, I feel there's a total race situation. Is this just a perception?
Between substances?
Yeah, like LSD. Yeah, like LSD.
That's merely because they all happen to fall under the psychedelic umbrella. Each of them in and of themselves has so much potential that they could each be a mini industry, around them. What they have in common is they all, generally came from plant-based origins, and for somewhat arbitrary and irrational reasons were all put out of the research mainstream, and now they're back. And that's what they have in common. And they seem to be very effective, but against a wide range of mental conditions and physical conditions. So I don't see it as a race at all, because I think that there's going to be so many different indications for these different molecules. Some will be addiction oriented, some will be pain, some will be anxiety, some will be depression, some will be inflammation. It's all like a whole pharmacopoeia has been opened.